I want to start off today by asking you a question. And it is, well, it's a very direct one. What is the one thing that God has told you to do that you have not yet done?
Ooh, that that immediately creates this quiet tension in the room, doesn't it?
It really
I mean,
does.
it completely bypasses all the vague generalities of life and just goes straight for that one specific heavy thing you know you've been putting off.
Yeah, if that question made you squirm a little bit listening to this, you are definitely not alone. Welcome to today's deep dive. It is Tuesday, March 24th, 2026. And while we are unpacking a really fascinating session today.
We really are. We're pulling from a YouTube transcript from the channel Whosoever Believes.
Right.
The specific section is called Discipleship-Obedience, and it's a Bible study led by Minister Tiffany Simmons for a group called Women Connecting with Christ.
And the mission for you listening today is to really extract this rigorous, practical, and honestly deeply psychological framework of what obedience and integrity actually look like in everyday practice.
Exactly, because we are looking at this material not just as religious instruction, but as a profound lens into human behavior.
Yeah.
It's an exploration of the excuses we naturally make and that massive frustrating gap between knowing what is right and actually doing it.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because right out of the gate, this framework challenges a massive assumption we carry in our modern culture.
It definitely does.
Think about how we usually operate today. We often equate being a follower or a learner like a disciple with acquiring knowledge.
Right, like gathering data.
Exactly. We assume that if we read the right books, listen to the smart deep dives, and just gather the information, we are officially disciples of that subject. We feel productive just by consuming the data.
Yeah, but Simmons radically shifts that metric. She argues that discipleship is never ever proven by what you know.
Wow. Never.
Never. Is only proven by what you do with that knowledge.
Yeah.
Which, requires us to completely dismantle our highly romanticized modern definition of love.
I mean, that is a big shit. How does she redefine it?
Well, to understand obedience in this context, we have to look at the psychological mechanism behind John 14.21. That text states that loving God means keeping his commandments.
Keeping them. Okay.
Yeah, and the Greek translation of that word, keeps, is incredibly revealing. It doesn't mean to just possess something like holding a book on a shelf and letting it gather dust.
Right.
It means to guard, to watch over
Yeah.
carefully, to preserve something actively because it is inherently valuable.
And Simmons uses this hilarious but honestly perfect analogy for this. She compares it to keeping milk in the refrigerator.
It sounds so mundane, but think about the underlying logic there.
Yeah.
You don't leave milk out on the counter. Why? Because you know the cost of milk is high,
Yeah.
and if you leave it exposed to the elements, it's going to spoil.
Right. You keep it in the fridge to preserve its use.
Exactly. You are guarding it because you value what it provides. You are actively modifying your environment to protect the asset.
But contrast that with how our society views love and devotion. You
Yeah.
know, we are obsessed with emotional love.
Oh, completely.
Simmons actually points out that love is not proven by conjured tears. She uses the example of movie romances, noting that trained actors can conjure up tears on command.
Right.
It looks like love, it feels deeply moving to watch, but it's just a performance. It's pure emotion without any foundational reality.
And relying purely on emotion is an incredibly fragile way to build a life. Simmons highlights a very common symptom of this emotional fragility, which is leaving the Bible completely untouched, just neglected for 11 months out of the year.
Wow, 11 months.
Yeah, and then only furiously picking it up when a life crisis hits. The psychology here is simple but brutal.
How so?
Well, if the word is truly valuable to you, like the milk, you guard it daily. You build a routine around it. If it's just an optional comfort blanket, you only grab it when you feel cold.
You know, here's where it gets really interesting to me. I want to push back on this a little bit because society constantly preaches the gospel of emotional authenticity.
Right. If you don't feel it, it's not real.
Exactly. We are told that going through the motions without the underlying feeling is fake. If you don't feel it, you shouldn't do it because that makes you a hypocrite.
Yeah.
But this text suggests the exact opposite. It suggests that guarding the action, doing the right thing, is the real love, regardless of whether the emotion is currently cooperating.
Right.
Yeah.
That is the core friction of the argument right there. Feelings are transient. They're just biochemical reactions to our environment.
Right.
If you wait for the feeling of motivation or the feeling of deep spiritual love to act, you will be paralyzed most of the time. The action of keeping or guarding the word creates a structural foundation.
So the action itself is the point.
Yes, doing the right thing when you feel absolutely nothing is, according to this framework, the highest form of valuing the relationship.
So if love is the action of keeping the word, what happens when that action is tested in private? Because this leads us directly into the architecture of integrity.
It does. This session brings up a concept from Job 17.9, using the imagery of clean hands and a pure heart.
Right, so break that down for us.
Well, the clean hands represent your outward actions and behavior, the things people can actually observe, and the pure heart is your inward life, your hidden motivations.
Okay.
To make sense of this practically, Simmons references a psychological concept by Dr. Johnny Parker, which is the front stage versus the backstage.
Oh, I love this concept because everyone has a front stage. It is what everyone sees. It's your public persona, your curated social media feed, your professional demeanor at work.
Yeah, we're all performing on the front stage.
Exactly. But the backstage is where the hidden issues live. It's what you do when the social gaze is completely removed.
It's the habits, the thoughts, and the behaviors you engage in when absolute no one is watching and there are no immediate consequences.
And the real-world example she uses to illustrate this front stage-backstage dynamic is honestly shocking.
Oh, it really is.
During the global pandemic lockdown, the entire world was supposedly shut down. We were all staying home, isolating, doing the right thing on the front stage. Yet, during that exact same period, the District of Columbia had to declare a state of emergency for gonorrhea.
Wait, really? A state of emergency?
Yes. It is a stark, undeniable statistical proof of the human backstage. Publicly, legally, the world was locked down. Privately, people were still, as Simmons puts it, creeping.
That is wild. But it proves that when you remove external accountability, when the front stage is shut down, the backstage takes over.
It totally does.
Inward purity and outward conduct are often completely misaligned. Humans use societal pressure as a crutch to behave. But the argument here is that when your hands are truly clean, when your private actions aren't contaminated by hidden compromise, it leads to progressive psychological and spiritual strength.
Right, because you aren't expending all this energy trying to hide your backstage.
Exactly. You build a resilience against the inevitable storms of life.
So what does this all mean for you listening? It is exactly like building physical muscle.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Yeah, you don't get strong by wishing for it or by watching fitness videos. You get strong by consistent, grueling reps over time. And one major compromise in your form, especially when you think no one is watching, isn't just a minor slip.
No.
It's like a serious joint injury. It forces you to backpedal, rehabilitate, and you lose all that progressive strength you've built.
And that progressive strength is the goal. But we have to look at the subtle psychological danger it introduces.
A danger to being strong.
Yeah. If you manage to build that strength and you achieve a level of spiritual, moral, or professional success, your brain naturally releases dopamine. You naturally start to think you are safe.
Right, you feel fortified, you've done the work.
But this framework warns that this is actually your absolute most vulnerable moment.
The danger of the pinnacle. It seems completely counterintuitive. Why would we be most in danger when we are at our strongest?
Because of the concept of abiding, which is explored in John 15.10. Abiding means remaining, staying, dwelling. Simmons playfully calls it stick-tuitiveness.
Stick-tuitiveness, I love that.
Yeah. Right. When you are at the bottom, struggling, you are hyper-aware of your need to abide, your need for help. When you reach the top, that perceived need just vanishes.
I really loved the story she used to illustrate what true abiding looks like. It is that classic young love on the telephone.
Oh yeah, the phone call.
Like, no, you hang up. No, you hang up. Are you asleep? No, I'm not asleep.
It sounds so ridiculous to adults.
It does. But it perfectly captures that desperate, consuming desire to simply stay connected to someone's presence. You refuse to disconnect, even when there's literally nothing left to say.
But maintaining that connection requires intense vigilance. The enemy, whether you view that as a literal spiritual adversary or just the entropy of human nature, doesn't usually attack when you are hyper-aware and actively fighting for connection.
Right.
Simmons points out a vital warning from the life of Jesus. He had massive success fasting for 40 days in the wilderness, but the devil didn't meet him on day one when he was preparing for the challenge. No, he met him right at the pinnacle of that success, when the fast was ending and he was physically depleted but spiritually victorious.
Wow. And there's this brilliant city gate metaphor used here too.
Yes, the city gates.
If you look at ancient warfare, The biggest breaches in a fortified city almost never happen by smashing through the massive, thick walls.
Right, they happen at the gates.
Exactly, the point of entry where commerce and daily life flow in and out. The enemy lurks exactly where you voluntarily let your guard down to let things in.
And if we tie this back to human psychology, we let our guard down precisely when we are on the mountaintop because we feel secure. Feeling good spiritually or morally triggers what Simmons calls a slow drag.
A slow drag. What does that look like?
You're on the mountaintop, everything is great, the crisis is past, so you slowly start neglecting the foundational basics.
Right.
You stop reading, you stop reflecting as intensely because your schedule gets busy with just enjoying your success. You push out the boring habits because you feel like you've permanently arrived.
It's the illusion of invulnerability. And when you neglect those basics, you inevitably fail. You leave the gate open and you make a mistake.
Exactly.
And this is where my favorite part of the entire analysis comes in. It's human nature's ultimate loophole.
Oh, this part is so convicted.
Right. When we realize we are in the wrong, instead of simply realigning and admitting fault, our ego takes over. We try to buy our way out of the mistake.
It is the classic pivot from obedience to sacrifice.
Yes.
The session examines 1 Samuel 15.22, which famously states, "To obey is better than sacrifice." He uses the historical account of Saul, who was given a direct, specific command by God.
And what did Saul do?
Well, he partially obeyed the instructions, but then decided to keep the best of the livestock to offer a massive grand sacrifice. He tried to use a religious performance to justify the part of the command he completely ignored.
The profound psychological insight here is that partial obedience is, in fact, disobedience. It is not a passing grade of 70%. It is a failure.
Yeah, you don't get partial credit.
Exactly. Simmons quotes Pastor Willie F. Wilson, who vividly describes people sitting on their astronomical anatomy, absolutely refusing to just apologize to someone they've wronged.
Astronomical anatomy, that's hilarious.
It is. But instead of just saying, "I'm sorry," they eagerly offer a sacrifice.
We have to ask why the human ego prefers sacrifice over obedience. Apologizing requires humbling yourself. It requires submitting to the reality that you were wrong, which strips away your power.
Right, it's vulnerable.
Very. A sacrifice, on the other hand, just requires spending your resources, your money, your time, your talent. Sacrifice keeps you in control.
Oh, that's so true.
You are the benefactor offering a gift.
Yeah.
It protects the ego perfectly. Simmons brings this right into everyday life. Think of the husband who messes up, completely refuses to have the difficult, humbling conversation to take accountability, but comes home with an expensive bouquet of flowers and perfume.
Yes. Or, the churchgoer who is completely out of alignment in their private backstage life. Maybe they are holding on to deep, bitter unforgiveness toward a family member.
Right.
But instead of doing the quiet, painful work of forgiving, which is the obedience required, they substitute it with intense, highly visible activity. They sing the loudest in the choir, they tithe heavily, they volunteer for the parking lot ministry and the sewing ministry.
They are offering a grand front stage performance to mask a backstage refusal to obey. They're basically trying to bribe their own conscience.
I was thinking about this and, it's like getting a speeding ticket.
Okay, tell me more.
The law requires you to pay the fine and admit you broke the speed limit. But instead of doing that, you go home and bake the police officer a massive 3-tier fondant cake and bring it to the precinct.
That is such a perfect analogy.
Right. We desperately want to do something grand on our own terms rather than do the specific, humbling, uncomfortable thing we were actually asked to do.
That analogy hits the nail right on the head. Any system of ultimate truth, whether it's legal, relational, or divine, is not impressed by the cake when a fine was required.
Exactly. Keep your cake. Pay the fine.
Yes. Sacrifice is what we substitute when we refuse to give what was actually asked for. So if the sacrifice is rejected, what is the actual protocol when we mess up? How do we fix the breach at the gate?
What does she suggest?
Simmons argues it comes down to one crucial element, which is immediate action. Haste.
She points to Psalms 119.5960.
She does. It talks about a two-step process.
Yeah.
Thinking on your ways,
Yeah.
and then turning your feet with haste, moving urgently. No delays, no waiting for the perfect emotional state to apologize.
And this brings up the geometry of repentance, which is heavily misunderstood.
Oh, massively
We
misunderstood.
constantly hear people proudly declare, I did a complete 360-degree turn in my life.
Which is so funny when you actually think about it.
It really is, because geometrically, a 360-degree spin is just performative movement. It puts you right back facing the exact same direction you started in. You expended a lot of energy to change absolutely nothing.
Right. True repentance is a 180-degree turn. It is a decisive, often quiet and awkward turning away in the completely opposite direction.
And it requires urgency because of a concept called the sin of omission, which is detailed in James 4.16.
The sin of omission.
Yeah, which is knowing the good you ought to do and simply choosing not to do it, which means delayed obedience isn't just you taking your time. Delayed obedience is disobedience with a waiting period.
Wow. Disobedience with a waiting period. That's powerful.
Yeah.
And to put practical boundaries around this, the session shares Pastor John K. Jenkins's 4 criteria for when a person actually has a justified reason to say no to a request or a command.
Okay, what are the 4 criteria?
You can rightfully say no if the request is unscriptural, unethical, immoral, or illegal.
Unscriptural, unethical, immoral, or illegal.
Exactly. If what you are being asked to do doesn't violate one of those 4 categories, and you still refuse out of pride, spite, or sheer inconvenience, you are stepping into deliberate disobedience. No, not at all.
This framework emphasizes what it calls the small foxes that destroy the vine. It's the incredibly mundane, irritating daily choices. Like what?
Like refusing to turn on your Zoom camera when you've been explicitly asked to participate in a meeting, or refusing to let a car merge in front of you in heavy traffic out of pure petty spite.
Oh, we've all been there. It is perfectly illustrated by the biblical parable of the 2 sons.
Remind me of that one.
The father asks both sons to go work in the vineyard. The first son cheerfully says, yes, sir, I'll do it, offering a great front stage performance. But he walks away and never actually does it.
Right.
The second son flat out says, no, I won't, which is a terrible front stage reaction. But then he rethinks it, humbles his ego, goes back, and actually does the work.
So the second son is the obedient one.
Yes. The one who performed the action is the obedient one. The outward performance means nothing without the backstage execution.
But, I have to admit, this is where I find a real tension in this whole philosophy.
What do you mean?
Well, this demands hypervigilance. Simmons insists that we shouldn't just examine our behavior on a Sunday morning. It needs to be an everyday, moment-by-moment lifestyle.
If you're listening to this, you might be thinking, how on earth does a person balance this constant self-correction, checking every thought, every merge in traffic, every Zoom call? Doesn't that just lead to feeling entirely overwhelmed and paralyzed by the weight of it all?
It is a heavy cognitive lift, undoubtedly. It requires burning a lot of mental calories to constantly monitor your backstage.
Exactly.
But the framework doesn't leave you stranded with just a grueling list of demands and behavioral checks. It provides the ultimate psychological and spiritual payoff.
Which is?
The incentive is outlined in John 14.23. The reward for this intense level of guarding the word isn't just a pat on the back or feeling morally superior. The text says that if you keep the word, God will come and make our home with you.
A permanent dwelling place.
Yes, not a temporary visit when you're crying on the mountaintop, but a settled, abiding presence. And the practical, everyday result of that dwelling is unmatched discernment.
Discernment. That makes total sense.
Think about the mental fog we all live in. When you remove the blockages of unrepented mistakes, when you stop stockpiling your daily acts of disobedience and maintaining a fake front stage, you gain crystal clear mental and spiritual connection.
Wow.
You know exactly what voice you are hearing. You aren't paralyzed by confusion when life gets murky because your internal compass isn't broken by hypocrisy.
That mental clarity is the ultimate asset, which honestly ties this entire journey together perfectly.
It really does.
Because the framework we've extracted today doesn't actually ask you for grand performative sacrifices. It doesn't want the impressive 3-tier fondant cake.
Keep the cake.
Right. It just asks for clean hands. It asks for immediate, unglamorous course corrections when you inevitably mess up. It asks you to swallow your ego, apologize the moment you realize you are wrong, and, just let the car merge in front of you.
It simply demands that your backstage reality matches your front stage performance. When those two align, the friction of your life dramatically decreases.
And that brings us right back to the provocative thought we started with. If, as Simmons argues, Partial obedience is really just a customized, highly personalized form of rebellion to protect your ego. Well, I want you to look at your own life today.
Yeah, take a hard look.
Look at your relationships, your work, your private habits. Are you currently masking a clear, stubborn no inside a really impressive performance of yes?
That is a question worth sitting with long after this audio stops playing.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep guarding the important things even when you don't feel like it, and we will catch you next time.